We are live. Great. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Generative Generation panel discussion series. Appreciate you guys being here and spending time with me this afternoon. We are going to kick off now and have a discussion. But before we do that, I'd like to just shout out the sponsors for this particular session. So today's live session is brought to you and sponsored by the Generative AI World Summit, which takes place at the MLOps World Summit in Austin, Texas, next week from October 25th through October 26th. And it also has a virtual component associated with it. Today's session, we're going to be talking about ethics and responsibility in generative AI. So given the power of generative AI, we're going to address the ethical implications, potential misuse, as well as the responsibility of researchers and practitioners in ensuring its safe and beneficial use. Again, thank you to the MLOps World Summit and the Generative AI World Summit for sponsoring this event. You can register for the conference with the discount code Harpreet for $75 off your ticket price. And that's Harpreet, all lowercase, Harpreet. And I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. So we've got a awesome panel, some familiar faces here as well. First, we have Alyssa. Alyssa is the CEO of Y Labs. Y Labs is a platform that ensures AI models from classification to LLMs generate accurate, fair, and safe customer experiences. Prior to Y Labs, she was at the Allen Institute for AI as well as Amazon. Next, we have Chris Brousseau. He's an expert in bleeding edge LLMs and the author of the Manning publication, LLMs in Production. He's currently the principal MLE at Nerd United and previously a lead data scientist at MasterCard. Next, we have David Talby, who is the CTO at John Slow Labs, helping companies build real-world AI systems by turning scientific advances into products and services. His role at John Slow Labs focuses on the healthcare AI platform. And finally, we have Patrick Hall. Patrick is the assistant professor at the George Washington University, where he's conducting research in machine learning and AI risk management. He previously co-founded a boutique law firm that focused on minimizing AI's legal and technical risks. Thank you so much to the panelists for being here. Appreciate you guys joining me, and so some of you even coming back for the second time. So I'd like to kick off the discussion to talk about something that's I think always timely, because there's always something happening with misinformation and deep fakes. And I think generative AI and the rate of progression that we've seen over the last 6 months even has amplified that or will amplify that. So I'm curious to get your perspective on this. With generative AI's capability, just being able to create this realistic synthetic content, what strategies can be employed to combat misinformation and deepfake technology? Let's go to Patrick, followed by Chris, and also any one of the panelists, if you'd like to jump in on this part of the discussion, feel free to use the raise hand icon, and I'll be sure to call on you. Patrick, let's go to you.
Yeah, I think there's a couple kind of emerging controls that people seem to think could be effective here. I don't think we know, but I do think that we should be trying them. So watermarking or signing of content. Another sort of particularly interesting one is recording or hashing all content and not letting people use these systems anonymously so that they know that anything they generate will be recorded and stored for, say, 45 days, something like that. And generally speaking, I mean, just better data management, data governance, data provenance to help us understand, not just with AI, right? There's all kinds of sources of synthetic data and fake data and bad data. And so generally sort of working on our digital signatures and just signing our work in the digital age. And I'll leave my comments there and can't wait to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Patrick, thank you. Let's go to Chris and David or Alyssa. If you'd like to jump in, please do. Chris?
So I think this is one of the first applications that we can see where a public blockchain is actually effective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've tried to use it for a lot of different things. However, having a publicly searchable blockchain where human created content is reported, because the alternative of trying to report the AI generated content, that balloons so fast, especially the more people have access to being able to generate that content. If we're able to report, I mean, we could try to do both, but I know some of my former colleagues at MasterCard are working on a company called Bunked right now that's doing just this, where they're trying to create a public blockchain with the tokens being that is verified human generated, and that like the date and time and place that a particular piece of content was created, so that we can verify and it's public and everyone can see it, and you can't get on the chain if it's not verified.
Curious about this concept of watermarking that you had mentioned, Patrick. Can you kind of explain what that means? Is that like, because I've seen like some works where it's like, the way that the language model generates text, you can kind of, I don't know, find out from the pattern of generation. Is that what watermarking is, or is it something
Yeah,
simpler?
well, it's a lot simpler to think about with images, right? And it's much closer to and in fact, some of the image generators are watermarking images already, which is a good thing. It's some kind of marking, but I think I like the blockchain is another control that I should have mentioned. I think I agree that it's a great use of blockchain. But on watermarking, I would encourage people not to focus so much on watermarking, but just think of this notion of signatures, right? Like whether content is made by an AI, whether content is made by a human, we need to sign our work. And, and it just, if we don't get into this mindset, our digital environment is going to become highly polluted with disinformation. So I think, watermarking is sort of a specific instance where we somehow put a special signature on AI generated content to indicate that it's AI generated. But I'd say it's smarter to think of it in as just one instance of kind of signing our work, right? Which is, I liked Chris's comment a lot. I think that's a viable control. I think this is kind of the converse where instead of all content registered, all content signed.
I've seen this actually recently in Grammarly. I pay for Grammarly, and just recently I noticed
Me
that
too.
when I'm using the kind of Grammarly Go assistant, there's something that pops up on the bottom now, and it says include something that says that it was kind of generated or fixed with Grammarly. So I think we're seeing steps towards that. But I
Yeah.
apologize. I think I was cutting off Alyssa there. Go for it.
No, I think you make a good point, and I wanted to pile on what was said by Patrick and Chris, which I resonate with a ton. This concept of massive amounts of information that are being synthetically generated right now, and the danger of that polluting the internet is typically not taken seriously in the enterprise, because in the enterprise, we always feel removed, or rather, enterprises feel removed from that danger, and it seems like a big problem that will be solved elsewhere, or will happen only on the wide web. But in fact, the enterprises themselves that are adopting all of the generative kind of the beauties and the magics of the generative AI tech are very vulnerable to the misinformation of that synthetic data as well, because in the enterprise, the knowledge bases are even smaller, and the amount of synthetic data and disproportions between human generated assets, even documentation and synthetically generated documentation can get disbalanced really fast. So this concept of signing that Patrick was mentioning, signing your work, I think while super, super important to develop general strategies of doing that overall on the internet, for the enterprise to think about signing the content that is being stored in their own knowledge bases, that's being stored in their own data stores, is super key, because the amount of synthetically generated documentation, text, marketing data, et cetera, is becoming much greater than human generated, and there are a lot of gotchas, and then reusing that content to generate new models or mine your knowledge bases and so on.
David, would you like to jump in on this discussion, this question here?
Yeah, I mean, I would add one aspect. Look, part of it has to be educating end users, because at the end, with misinformation, there are a lot of people who want to generate misinformation and generate in a way that's very engaging and very infuriating and very kind of, very easy to believe. And there are many, many people who want to believe it and want to share it, right? Whether or not it's right or wrong, because it fits the politics, it fits the specific needs. And I think, look, at the end, a lot of the, I don't think it can be a technology-only solution, right? Because you will not have enough people who can do it, right? So, okay, right now, I mean, I have teenage kids, they can tell spam for not spam, right? And they could do it since they were, 6 years old, right? Because they know that, yes, most of the messages that, people that they get sent over the internet are junk, right? Because this is just the world we live in, right? So they also know when they go on TikTok, yes, if they see something, it's a nice video, whether or not it's actually true, like it most likely isn't. Okay, but if you want to believe that it's true and you want to share it, you'll do it, and no one will ever going to stop it. So I think at the end of the day, that's how we solve it.
Coming back on this, kind of question about organizations kind of navigating this ethical dilemma. Alyssa touched on it here, but I'd love to get Patrick's kind of perspective on this. What role does corporate responsibility play in this context? Mitigating the risk of misinformation with generative AI.
Okay, I work with lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer, and never want to be perceived as pretending to be a lawyer. But I think the way I would urge organizations to think about this is, if you are releasing generative AI as part of a product, you need to test it and think about it like a product. Consumers have an expectation that products are safe, not predatory, not deceptive, and you're likely, there's a possibility that you'll get yourself in trouble if you don't treat it like a product, right? I think what I think one of the most, and I'm not an ethicist either, but I think one of the most unethical things that, large organizations can do with generative AI is take their sort of internal generative AI science projects and, foist them onto consumers as kind of like a large-scale human experiment without any human oversight. So I think just think about it like a product and just apply normal sort of business and IT governance, and that would go a long way. And recognizing that the technology is not magic. Just treat it like other IT products. I think that would be the first thing I would say. And then there are some special gotchas for generative AI, but I'm not even going to go into that, because I just wish, the main thing organizations could do is just treat it like a serious product when they introduce it into the world. And I'll leave my comments there.
Yeah, go for it, David.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I work primarily in healthcare. We see this all the time. Where people, 3-person startup, they cobble something together. It comes like, for example, we can generate patient cohorts synthetically, and it's completely safe. And you look at it, and like we have the same tools. Like, no, you can't, right? Because if you come saying you can actually use this to evaluate a clinical trial, or evaluate what should be the path of treatment, right? Or use this to even write an academic paper and claim the treatment is better than treatment B. No, you cannot, right? With very simple, very, very simple testing. And we see this around things like bias, around fairness, right? Around how you deal with different types of categories of people. But we see this also in just basic robustness testing. I think there is something definitely wrong with release it to market first and then fix it later. Where especially in healthcare, we see a lot of people making claims, and it's like it just doesn't work. And also it's at this point, as a customer, right, as a buyer, or someone who adopts something, it's really on you to test it, right? Because there's very little, really very little preventing anyone from saying whatever they want.
Anything to add here from Alyssa or Chris? Alyssa?
I can pile onto that. when it comes to generative AI, ChatGPT is probably the best example of the overarching problem. It looks magical, it looks very smart, and it looks like everything that comes out of it is awesome and just automates your job and makes everything absolutely easy. But don't be fooled by kind of the first sense of magic. It still needs to be verified, validated, and it's too early to let it run hands off the wheel. And whether you're using ChatGPT to have your employees make company decisions, analyze data, or you're building experiences on top of LLMs, I think from the perspective of where this technology is at, as David was saying, upon further investigation, there are a lot of gotchas and a lot of issues that could be uncovered. So do not let this run without testing, validating, building it like real software. And I think this technology is overall too early for completely like no human in the loop type of applications. So putting the human in there to ensure verification.
It's not for decision making. And I think that's something that perhaps the vendors have let the public sort of ignore. And in fact, I want to be clear. Like, I think these technologies are incredible research achievements. I use them all the time. I'm not trying to be overly negative here, but I personally, when I have to make an important decision, I don't do it by guessing the next word. And that's the fundamental technology here.
You don't?
And
so how do you do it?
Well, I try to weigh factors. I try to weigh factors in known past data, right?
Yeah, you take a standard distribution of everything that you've said before, and then you pick the most average piece, right?
That's right.
Me and my wife together, yes.
Yeah. But I want to be clear. Like if I'm dealing with my credit card company or something, maybe I would rather be talking to ChatGPT sometimes. But the technology as it stands today is not valid or reliable for decision making. And I think that's something that I wish consumers understood better. I think it's tricky because my entire career, machine learning has been for decision support or decision making. And I'd argue that this new class of tools is for generating content, which is just a different task than decision support.
Chris, let's hear from you.
Dude, I wanna take this in a severe left turn. So just be ready, right? I want to talk about corporate responsibility in this context, and I really want to put a lot more responsibility on the corporations than is currently there. A good metaphor that I use to talk about this is recycling. This is kind of the model that we're running right now with generative AI, where a corporation is responsible for creating the product, and then the consumers are all responsible for all of the ethical, economic, and societal impact of that product. Like what we were just talking about. How can we deal with misinformation and deepfake technology? Well, one of the easiest ways is to grab these companies that definitely have the resources and are 100% logging all the content to publish, public logs. We don't need to create some sort of a ChatGPT detector if all of ChatGPT's generative content is able to be read on the internet. You can just, copy whatever you're looking to see if it was plagiarized or generated and just go search, right? That's a Control F problem. I want to put a much higher responsibility on the corporations for any impact that this generation would have, considering they're just letting it loose. And then having people like us have to debate about, how can the consumers deal with it and how can the consumers take responsibility for what the corporation created?
So kind of bringing it, let's go to David, then I'll
wait. So, I don't know about making it all public because there's a privacy issue there. Right. I don't know that,
Have you ever been counseled that you should put private information into anything on the internet? Like, why would we treat this differently?
Yeah, but we probably
Isn't
wouldn't
that also part of the terms of service of OpenAI to not put private information into it?
We probably wouldn't want to have all of our Google searches made public, right? All of our discussions with,
Sure.
everything we search on the internet, right? Because that talks about our political opinions and religious opinion and romantic opinions and health issues. right? So there are definitely issues there. Look,
they don't have to publish the questions, right? Just the responses from ChatGPT.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are probably ways around that. Look, I think one thing I would say, and I think we are starting to see this. There is some legislation that already protects people. Like in healthcare, for example, one of the tests we run on some of our own LLMs, right, is there's a whole page or 2 pages of a patient story, right, and then you want to extract, what do you think is the diagnosis? What should be done next? Okay, and then you can go back to, so you can change one word, change married to divorced, change Hispanic to Asian, right? And sometimes shockingly, it changes the medications you should take, right? Which is obviously clinically wrong, right? But this is a very simple example where if you put something like this online through an API, this is just plain illegal, right? Like you cannot, right? It is. It's not what it should be. It is, right? So if you had a person answer the phone and you tell them the story and they give you a medical diagnosis, it would be illegal, and it's really the same no matter how you do it, right? And so there are a lot of those use cases where I think it's going to start happening already. And I think from what I've seen, the most prominent example was in California just last month, like late September. The Supreme Court of California decided that companies who provided AI recruiting software need to stand trial, right? For the same reason, right? Because they released software and the software did things, and really with some fairly basic testing, right? You can show that this software really should never have been, right? Should never have been used on real people, right? So I think some of this with just, consumer protection, you're not supposed to lie to people, right? You're not supposed to treat people, based on the color of their skin, right? Or the immigration status, or sexual orientation. These are things that are already there. I think we will see some of that coming in. And really at this point, yes, I think we'll see it. Look, I can tell you, I mean, Sammy, I work in healthcare. We are already committed by contract to doing some of those things, right? That's why we build our own libraries, we build our own testing, and healthcare is usually ahead in those cases, because today if you submit a medical device or a clinical trial, you have to show, right, who are the people, did you take reasonable effort, right, to make sure that it's representative in some way. I think it's going to come pretty quickly to other
I'll call out that I think what we're getting at is the difference between sort of the unregulated consumer technology market, without commenting on whether more regulation is needed, versus more regulated areas like employment and healthcare and consumer finance. I tend to work most commonly with financial services companies, and due to the 40 to 50 years of ACOA and FICRA and Fair Housing Act, and then the 10 to 15 years of model risk management, the large financial services companies, I would argue, are some of the most prepared organizations to make the decision as to whether they want to adopt, right? And I think, there was the article that came out maybe a few weeks, I don't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, CTO of Goldman Sachs saying like, look, we really haven't put this into production yet. And it's still kind of a question for us. And, again, I would just call that out for people who might not know that some of the most sophisticated purchasers of this technology are highly skeptical of it, or sort of highly skeptical of both its validity and its business use, but also optimistic about it, right? And I think if I've said it shouldn't be used for decision making, let me go ahead and say it shouldn't be used for anything in medicine, finance, or law either. It's just not ready for high risk decision support. It's just not ready for that or designed for that.
I love where this conversation is going, and actually I'm personally curious, given the panel here, the thoughts that people have on this. So Chris brought up corporate responsibility, and Patrick brought up, this technology is not ready yet. We can feel pretty good about what's going to happen with highly regulated industries. Like there's some amount of control there. However, this year we're witnessing this technology becoming a consumer-facing technology, and what consumers do with it is much less controlled And I mean, to me, much scarier. I give you an example. One of my best friends is a nurse practitioner, and she was going through a kind of regular annual retraining course, and some slides that the professor shared were generated using ChatGPT. That makes me very uncomfortable. So what do people think as far as on this panel? I'm curious kind of Patrick's takes and Chris takes on this. How does that get controlled? How does that usage gets controlled? So we're not, suddenly training our nurses on what ChatGPT spits out.
David, go for it.
Yeah, let's say I think it's only a problem if you have bad intentions. Because look, first of all, my company, we do generate content with used to be ChatGPT, now we have our own LLMs, and yes, you generate blog posts and articles and code and other things. And the key is whatever we publish, we stand behind, right? So you have a human reads it, right? And look, like for one of the things ChatGPT does really well, if English is not your first language and your grammar and vocabulary are not strong and you're writing a very technical article, ChatGPT is an excellent editor. Okay, really, and you have like very nicely formatted paragraphs, good language, right? It's easier to read. So those are the kind of things we do. But yes, you have to once it's out, it's like, yes, I wrote it. You have a problem with it, talk to me, right? So as long as you do that, I think it's okay. Around other things, also I had the same discussion with my daughter. I said, what's going to happen when most of this feed is also AI generated? If you just look and it comes up, it's probably already is. Right, so I think people just, if you look at your feeds and what's there, it's already not real in any sense of the word, right? Like no human chose what to show you, right? So now really the fact whether someone wrote it or someone summarized it or someone put it together from other things, not much of a difference as long as you know to treat it as entertainment, and you say as not as a nurse education. Right, but of course, if you want, if you come with bad intentions, yes, there's a whole lot you can do. Right, you can definitely swing political opinions, write public opinions, make money of it, absolutely, and people do.
Let's go to Patrick, then Chris. Thank you, David and Alyssa.
Well, I mean, back to Chris's brave point about corporate responsibility, I just don't think we're going to get it without regulation. And I don't, I don't really want to comment on that, except that to say, there's a really big experiment happening, and there's a control, and we have a control group. So our friends in the EU, have taken a very aggressive stance towards regulating digital technology, and everyone expects that the EU AI Act, which specifically bans, several types of technologies that are designed to modify the behavior of populations. And so we have a good experimental setup. In 10 years, we can see what's different about Europe and the US, and see if one way of doing this was better than the other. I mean, my personal politics lean more towards regulation, but I certainly don't want bad rushed regulation either, and I don't want over regulation. So it's a tricky question, but we'll have some data in about 10 years or maybe a little bit sooner, comparing what's going on in the US and the EU with digital technology.
I think my take for education here, that getting to what Alyssa's bringing up about PowerPoints having slides generated by ChatGPT. So I'm writing a book on this right now, LLMs in production, and like I'm not going to pretend that we don't consult LLMs as part of that writing process, but I am going to tell you that like none of the book is generated. And when I say that, like, what are we consulting the LLMs for? Well, I want to make sure that the book is really valuable. I want to make sure that every point that I'm making is something that you can't just Google and you can't just ask ChatGPT for. So I consult ChatGPT about what it knows, right? What it knows. I'm going to anthropomorphize it like that. What does it know? When it starts getting things consistently wrong about language modeling or about ML ops or about, whenever you dig into a subject, it starts getting things incorrect. And whenever it does that, and I can't get it on Bard and I can't get it on Anthropic, I know I'm going to write about that. Like a good example of something I was writing yesterday is, how do you get accelerate and deep speed and bits and bytes and XFormers to all work in conjunction together for the best optimized training and inference that you can possibly get? How do you do that? ChatGPT cannot help you, and neither can any of those other models that I mentioned. And so I know that content is valuable, and I would love to see much more of our education, especially our higher education, turn in that direction, where we're raising the standard of what we're teaching, because our students can just look up a lot of what's already there.
Mm-hmm. Quickly on that, I am teaching, and and I teach like an undergraduate data ethics class where I make my students write different kinds of assignments about machine learning, and I am encouraging them to use especially ChatGPT this semester, and encouraging them on sort of like how to disclose their use. And I mean, like I said, I don't certain aspects of how this technology has been brought to market I hate. But I don't want to devalue, it is helping these kids become better writers, and it is pushing them, it's making their writing processes easier. It's essentially making them smarter. I mean, I think that's kind of what Chris is saying. Like, you can use these tools to make yourself smarter. And I think that's sort of their ideal place, or one of their ideal places. And so, yeah, I mean, I am trying to educate students about it. I'm not sure I'm doing a great job or anything, but yeah, it's happening slowly, or it's happening in some places.
Yeah. David, go ahead.
Yeah, there was one other thing. Well, a couple of papers that came out in the last month, I think there was an article about it, where generative AI is one of the very few technologies that seems to actually lower the gap between people, right? So most of the technologies we have basically, make the smart smarter, right? And make those who did not have the opportunity fall behind further. But generative AI seems to be the other way around, right? So there seems to be the case where, maybe I didn't even go to high school, but, I can write a legal brief as well as any lawyer, right? When I go
a bad lawyer, as well as a bad lawyer.
Sure. No, but yes, but there's something to be said. Oh, you submit.
No, there's something to be said for it.
Here's a 50-page rebuttal, right?
Well, you can write an email, to your kid's teacher, or you can write an email to the, website that ripped you off. And yeah, it's the one thing I think you're right. And I see this with my student, but I will point out that even in the US, there's plenty of people that still don't have good computers and lack access to the internet and stuff like that. But, and those people are being left out of the training data of these systems, which I think brings up interesting issues. But yeah, it's a mostly freely available technology for those of us with laptops and smartphones and high-speed internet that has some equalization potential.
Yeah, and there's some. I mean, I can find the papers and share them, but the initial indication, this is actually one of the very few technologies that actually seems to do that. Actually seems to offer very little improvement to the people already at the top. Because if I'm already a very good lawyer, right, you're not going to
help
you better. Yeah.
Right. We say if I'm a bad lawyer, right, you can do a much better job than I do, right? Just to bring me to average. And you can do it with resume writing, you can do it with marketing, right? You can do it with programming, right? You can do it with other aspects.
So how do we kind of shift left here, in the sense that, okay, like before these technologies become products, before they escape the labs, like how do we verify and validate the outputs of these systems to make sure that they're ethical and legal, and they kind of follow those guidelines? Anybody want to jump in there?
I'd love to. Yeah. This is something that I've talked about consistently and very often. Is I think like the number one point of scalability for LLMs, before we can get into stuff like representative wealth disparity, like making sure that it's representing every class of society, is language, right? And it's not the easiest subject to approach, which is why I understand why many people haven't, because there are a lot of I'm going to say like regions where the language that you speak and the name that you call that language is actually like a very important thing. And so it's difficult to approach it, but if we can hit like a worldwide basis of people using ChatGPT, or I keep saying that as the LLM, but just using LLMs and generative AI and contributing to the data, at least in a representative way, I think that's our first step to make sure that, you know, it actually can be verified. Because right now we're throwing like a subset of people that it was able to be trained on, which is the people that are essentially just chronically online. And those are the people that it trained on, and those are the people that are being represented right now. And it's achieving, frankly, miraculous results given that training data. And I want to see how much better it can get when we're able to, you know, train on everybody.
Anybody else on the panel like to jump in there? So the question was, yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell if you want to talk about tools. Yes. I mean, we have, I mean, the lang test library, which is an open source library we built specifically to test LLMs. We use because there's still this there's this notion where really you just need to test accuracy basically, and you have benchmarks and you test against the benchmarks. But obviously this is not enough. So we lang test right now right now I believe 11 dimensions that we test. So there's a robustness, there's fairness, there's representative, there's toxicity, there's truthfulness, there's personal data leakage, right? There's several others. And the goal is really just basically the goal is to get to a point where basically you do unit testing, right? So you know, before you send something to production, right? So just like, you know, when you send software to production, you have unit testing on functionality, but you test it for security, you test for monitoring, you test for logging, you test it for other things. The goal is to do the same here. Right, yeah, it's a tool. It's an open source tool. It does that. The cool thing about generative AI is you can generate some of the tests sometimes, right? Especially where you think it's like, okay, things like representativeness, right? Things like how you deal with different ethnicities, right? Races, genders, right? Changing names, changing countries, even around toxicity, truthfulness. You can generate some of these things. And sometimes you can even go back and augment the training data, right? And help with that. Kind of say, if you don't have representative from real people, here are some proposed things you may want to try. So, it's one tool. It's an open source tool. There are definitely others out there. I think we will see more of that. But I think just technically, and that's probably one responsibility we need to have really as data scientists, as engineers, to come and say, as I said, there's the regulatory aspect, there's the education aspect, but part of it, yeah, we actually need to build it better. Right, as just when you get it out of the factory floor, it's like when you have a car, yeah, it should have airbags and and a headrest and a seatbelt, and just and this doesn't solve accidents and traffic collisions because you still have drunk driver and misdesigned roads. But I think a lot of these basic things that are in our responsibility are still not happening, and definitely I think we will see many more tools that. That will enable us to do a better job.
I cannot agree more with David. And from kind of to the specific 2 points that I passionately agree with are the following. There's a tendency in the machine learning community to evaluate everything with one metric, which, yes. In the traditional models, it was accuracy. And then decade later, we learned that that's a very bad practice. And then if you evaluate everything with one metric of accuracy and say, oh, it's above 93%, it's great, and let's ship it, that is a bad practice, and is a reason why we haven't made as much progress as we could make in kind of fairness and adoption of traditional models. We're moving in that same dangerous direction, I think, partly in LLM evaluation, because again, there's a tendency to just say, is there one metric that I can evaluate things with? And that's dangerous. So very much an anti-pattern. And I love LangTest, the open source library that David was calling out, because there is a range of metric that the library makes it easy for you to test along, and you should not settle on one number. You should make sure that you have great representation. The second thing I would call out is the the tendency again to think of these LLMs as I'm just gonna, I don't know, look at the Helm benchmarks and decide whether this model is good enough for me or not. Again, very dangerous because these models are built to be good for any task, right? They're foundation models. That's the cool thing about them. Your application is supposed to perform a specific task. So looking at industry benchmarks or things that are published that use academic data sets, it does not let you say that this model is qualified to do a specific task that will be impacting potentially your customers. So think about when you're evaluating as a practitioner, think about what is my task? How do I quantify this particular usage of an LLM here or usage of an image generative model actually satisfies the task rather than relying on benchmarks or one accuracy metric.
Definitely check out Lang Test. I just looked at it right now. It's got a number of notebooks that will help you get started. Go start on GitHub. Patrick, go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to climb way up on my soapbox. I think, other panelists have made this point in other questions, so I'll be the one that gets to make it in this question. It's really about people. It's not about technology. It's never about technology. All technology problems are people problems. And so, yeah, again, I'll get back to testing these things like products. If they're going to be pushed onto consumers, they should be tested like products, maybe like medicine, maybe like airplanes. And if we use the medicine example, which I'm not saying is exactly right, but let's just run with this medicine example. What if your doctor, not your doctor. What if some dudes, walked up to you and said, hey, here's a pill. It can fix you. It's correlated to good results in completely unrealistic conditions. Take it. That's the level of testing we're doing now. Like literally, we saw that these language models were correlated with good performance in completely unrealistic conditions. Rush them out to consumers, right? And I think that's what I really take issue with. So one, we need to think about the people that are using them and test language models like products. We can learn from medicine. We can learn from aerospace. We can learn from many other disciplines that brought high risk products to market. And now like air travel is very, very safe. Our medical system is mostly very good. I don't know. Medicine is mostly safe in the United States anyway. And so, think about the people that are going to be using this and that you're bringing a product to market and you're not putting a PDF on archive, right? Like there's a big difference between how we evaluate things that like the end of their life is they're written up in a PDF versus consumer products. And then I would say, think about another frustration I have is that you don't really govern technology. Like ChatGPT doesn't care. I don't want to shock people. ChatGPT doesn't know if it's turned on or off. ChatGPT can't get fired from its job and things like that. So you can't really govern technology. You govern people. And you have to set up structures within organizations for human accountability, but that's not going to happen without regulation. You only see that in healthcare and insurance and finance and mortgage lending. So there just has to be, some chime in from above that puts human accountability in the loop for these systems. And until then, it's just going to be a mess. So I'll shut up there and we can move on or keep talking about it.
Well, let's kind of double click on that because there's been a couple of themes that have come up. One of them, of course, not being a technology problem, it's a people problem. The other one is training data. So I'm wondering, let's combine those two together and talk about us, the developers, the people out here that are building these technologies as products. What challenges do we face when we're trying to reduce bias in our training data, and how can we overcome some of these challenges? Let's go to Chris. I'm gonna, because you're probably covering this in your book, eh?
Oh yeah, dude, this is chapter 1, 2, and 3. Right? It's the whole book. One of the examples that I bring up that I think is pretty innocuous is when you get unexpected results. I think that's one of the best tests that we can do to see whether a model is doing well is these models are made to be helpful with more context, because that context essentially solves for pragmatics within language. So one way that you can test for unexpectedness and instability is by giving less context. One of the examples that I give is I gave Midjourney and I gave DALL-E 3 when it came out, leader, and that was it. And just let it generate 1,000 images. I found several of those images were gender bent versions of Rosie the Riveter, where it's clearly a man. Now, I don't think that that is physically hurting anybody. And I don't think that that is like, I think that that has less of a societal impact than a lot of people would say that it should. However, I can say with a lot of confidence that the developers of Midjourney and the developers of OpenAI did not intend for that to happen, right? And that's one of the things that I like to advocate for is, hey, give it less context and just look at it. You know, use it a lot and see if you're giving it the pragmatic data during training for it to really have those guardrails up when it's actually consumer facing. Another example that I gave was prompt injecting ChatGPT and GPT-4. I was pretty excited. I got it in one prompt on each of them to give me a Python function that intakes your race, your age, your gender, and your sexual orientation and tells you whether or not you're hired, right? You can immediately see, like, that is much less of an innocuous example, but you can prompt inject it right now because those pragmatic guardrails haven't been set up during training.
I got to jump in here. In here. So I do a lot of red teaming, and I red teaming is low in anomaly detection, which is dumb. Okay, but we don't have much better approaches right now. So whatever, we do red teaming. I do red teaming. And a theme that I wanted to get in on Chris's comment, and it gets back to the notion of humans, is it's a lot easier to trick these things when you frame things in coding and AI terms. And I suspect that is because of the bias of the companies and the engineers and the people that brought it to market. Like, if I'm asking about AI or code, I can't be a bad guy. Like, we're the good guys, And so I think that those kinds of human biases cannot be downplayed when we're thinking about designing and testing these systems. And I'll just, like, NIST did a great job on taxonomizing, like, all the different human biases that play into the design of AI systems. And I think every shrewd data scientist should read NIST SP 1270, which I am an author of, to be transparent. But yeah, it's not just systemic bias, which is a big nasty problem, but it's also human bias, cognitive biases that make their way into these systems. And especially because these systems are talking to us now, those cognitive biases become more and more apparent.
Thank you, Patrick. David or Alyssa?
Alyssa?
I think a lot of great things have already been said about training data. I probably would just say an obvious thing and let David speak about the work that they're doing at John Snow Labs, because I think when it comes to training data, we kind of lost track with these models becoming available essentially as an API call, and we don't think much of, like, how did it come together? What data did it use? And that is very important. As a consumer product, probably not as important if you're, trying to refine your writing. It's actually probably good that it used all of the internet, because hopefully it bubbled up pretty good writing styles. But if you're using these models for something more than just a toy consumer product, really, really think twice before taking something off the shelf if you don't know what it was trained on and how carefully the data was curated, because there's no fine tuning out of that problem. Unfortunately, contrary to the common opinion, doesn't matter what data was used, we'll just fine tune and then guardrail it and yada yada. Very, very hard. So taking models, potentially it's harder to get to these models, but taking models that were purpose built for certain tasks, rather than just closing your eyes and ignoring what it was trained on.
Thank you, Alyssa. David?
Yeah, one thing I would say, I mean, representation is a very hard problem because you, like you said, you cannot solve it technically, right? So like one of the issues we see in healthcare, for example, is like specifically in the US, there are about a third of the population, about 100 million people who are either uninsured or underinsured. Okay, and it's not a representative part of the population, right? It's people who are, who tend to be poorer, right? There's specific races who are overrepresented there, specific zip codes who are overrepresented there. Okay, and the problem is you just don't have the data, right? So the worst thing you can do is you come and say, oh, I'll just generate data, right? But so what you do, exactly.
I love that,
right? Because this is blackwashing. You take rich white people's data and you just put black as the race, and you come and say, I've just generated synthetic data that's now representative. Right? What you're missing the fact is, no. If you give those medication to those people, that's not how they're going to react at all, right? The point was, right, that we actually know what is the right thing to do for them because they're actually different people, right? And you haven't done any of that, right? But so one thing is just really to be able to recognize it and not do it, but the reality, it's a very hard problem, right? It comes down to politics, and sometimes it comes down to the fact that, look, you just don't have the data, right? And in medicine, there are ways around it, right? So, for example, you put out the COVID vaccine, right? And you kind of say, look, here's the COVID vaccine. We did trials. In the trial, we did not test it on pregnant women because it was too dangerous. Okay, now we have it. Whether pregnant, if you're pregnant, whether you should take it, talk to your doctor, because we really don't know, right? So one thing you can do is can at least be transparent about it, right? So kind of says, yes, like, we don't know, there's a risk, you should evaluate risk, like, we'll solve it, it's an open research problem. But I would say I have seen quite a few cases where it's like, wait a minute, this is like, I said, this is just obvious misinformation where things just should not be done. And that does happen, right? And if there's one area where I would like to see more regulation, it's really just, there's one thing regulation does well, which is really just weeding out bad actors, right? And still there are quite a few of those that we do see.
I kind of want to just distill this whole conversation down, because I think all four of us have hit on the exact same point, and this is a data-centric problem, right? And I want to, and we keep getting these publications that get put out from alpaca to chinchilla and llama this year. Less is more for alignment, right? We're seeing that it's less about the big data and more about the concentrated, representative, and high quality data. It's more about the clean data. And I'm waiting for that to become more of an industry trend.
Thank you, Chris. A couple comments coming in here from live stream. Kira says bias is inevitable. It's more about how we govern ourselves and the education that is provided to others on how to navigate correctly based on the use cases. Sebastian says all these concerns seem related at base to the framing problem for AI. A system is only as good as its inputs, and humans are critical inputs to AI. That being said, let's kind of touch on human-in-the-loop approaches then. So I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts about, how can human-in-the-loop approaches be effectively integrated into these Gen AI systems so that we can ensure that there's, ethical use and mitigation of these type of concerns. David.
Yeah. So I think where human-in-the-loop works well is, for example, you're saying, when you write your book, at the end, it needs to be your book, right? So if there is a sentence that I disagree with, I come to you. You don't tell me, oh, I've never written or read it. That's like, I don't know where that came from, right? It's like, it's you, right? And that's really what it means that this is your book, right? This is, this is what you show your kids, look, I made this, right? And I can say, for us, for example, as a corporation, yes, when we put something out, it's ours, we stand behind it. So that's where you do want humans, right? Basically to take ownership. But I would say we do have to understand that there are definitely quite a few areas where taking humans out of the loop makes things better, especially in terms of bias. Okay, so I think the financial industry is a good example. Basically, like the only way to get the financial service industry to give loans to Black people at some point, right, was to come and say, listen, you cannot use race. Okay, if you use race at all in any of the project, as in you've seen the person face to face, okay, you can be sued for that. Okay, right, and the way you solve it is you make it algorithmic, right? You can say, look, it's by your credit score, right? You cannot talk to the bank manager, you cannot talk to someone else, right? Because that's how it was done, right? You got loans based on your father knowing the bank manager, and they know you, and they know the family, right? So, in this zip code, everybody gets loans for the small businesses. In the zip code next door, nobody can ever buy a home, right? So there are definitely those. So humans, like trusting humans in humans to fix biases is a horrible idea. Okay, really, this the biological things we are the problem with bias. So I think that there's definitely it needs to be a use case by use case thing.
Anybody else want to jump in there? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll push back a little. All right. So one thing I hear all the time is that quote unquote humans don't scale. And oftentimes it's in the same talk by someone talking about how we need trillions of humans to populate the stars. Whatever. Humans scale. We're just very expensive. Okay. So humans do have the capability to regulate these systems, get these systems under control. It's just if we're going to do it or not, and if it's going to be economically feasible or not. So human scale, we went from 0 to 8 billion pretty quickly. And if we're all going to be unemployed because of generative AI, what are we going to do besides watch it? And this has been an enjoyable conversation. I plan to follow up with everybody. I'm just some broke assistant professor, but I don't think it's a data or an AI framing problem at all. I think it's a human problem. So I'll leave it there. And it was great to meet and speak to everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. I know we're running up on time here. I'm just curious if anybody wants to touch on this last question here, and it's about the open source community. So, how can the open source community contribute to this responsible development and deployment of generative AI? If anybody wants to jump in, please do. And if you have to leave, panelists, totally understandable. I know we're running up on time, but I would love to have your perspective on this. Let's go to Chris first.
All right. Yeah, I'm avidly active in the open source community. One of the things I'm doing right now, I speak Slovak. I've lived in Slovakia. I love that place, and I love the people there. And there's a very small amount of representation, especially within LLMs, for languages like Slovak that are close to a lot of other languages that are represented, right? And so something that I'm doing is, for example, Alexa Gordic is doing right now the No Language Left Behind project, except open source, because Facebook already has that, but it's closed source. So I am grabbing Slovak data and I am translating it by hand with some of my friends, and we're making sure that it's not only representative, but that it's high quality, right? We're adding to it, we're changing it, we're tweaking it to make sure that it's actually usable, and so that we can guarantee that the syntax that's coming out of the model at the end of it is going to be likewise representative and high quality. It's a lot of work and it sucks, but I love doing it because I know that the downstream application of it is going to be very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. David or Alyssa, any input there?
I mentioned Access, so that's an open source library. We've started, we have a full team, we fund it, we work it, we take pull requests, we continue. So of course it doesn't solve the whole problem, but I think with open source tools, with anything you do, it's kind of just pick one little thing and make it better, right? And if more people would do that, like just like just like you said, you talked about Slovak, and yes, we do a lot of language detection works. Always the Czech versus Slovak is always tricky, yes, and there's definitely lack of representativeness there. I think that's really what people have to do. Just pick one thing that you care about. Just try to make that better, and that's it.
There's everybody wants to get into like the AI engineer role, or the the trainer of models, these quote unquote sexy roles, research engineer, research scientist, or whatever. But there's a need for people on the safety aspect of it. And, I guess that job can be just as sexy as well, right? Safety and of AI. I'm wondering, do you have any tips to share for anybody who maybe might want to consider this as a path that they want to go down for their career? What can they do to get started? If anybody has any input on that, would love to hear.
I would say number one, go follow Michael Runningwolf and talk with him on LinkedIn. He is one of the big faces leading an effort to make sure that underrepresented communities, whether it's race or language or sexuality, whatever, underrepresented communities become represented in this field. And there's a lot of work to be done.
Alyssa?
I can connect that to open source because I think a lot of the work that's happening on generative side is greenfield, and the best way to get into the field and kind of roll up your sleeves is contributing to open source. Whether you're very new to the field, but you work in some organization that's using some aspect of the Gen AI technology, and you can bring the insights or the challenges into the open source, that's one way to get involved, especially from the safety side, right? Because we spoke quite a bit about best practices that would be originating in like healthcare, fintech, and other regulated industries. So being part of the open source community is a great way to both learn about the space, contribute to the space, and develop a career in it. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you everybody for being here. Appreciate you guys taking time in your schedule to join. Appreciate everybody on LinkedIn that was watching and everybody that joined us here. Again, shout out to the Generative AI World Summit for hosting these last 4 panel discussions, sponsoring these last 4 panel discussions. Remember, this takes place next week, October 25th and 26th, 2023. in Austin, Texas. There's also a virtual component. Be sure to get your ticket for a additional, for $75 off by using the discount code Harpreet. Thank you everybody for being here. Appreciate you guys joining, and be sure to check out Lang Kit by Y Labs, which is an open source LLM and safety library, as well as Lang Test. I think these are going to be things I'll definitely be playing with over the next week or so. Hopefully I can get some time to play with them Saturday morning and just hack around with them. Thank you guys again for
no
being
better
here.
way to spend Saturday morning than ramping up on AI safety open source projects.
Yes,
exactly.
Thank you guys for being here, and have a good rest of your day. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.